My name is Carlos Cordova. I'm a professor in geography at Oklahoma State University. My area of research is mainly geoarchaeology and environmental history and quaternary paleoecology. My book, Crimea and the Black Sea, is a book which worked for a very long time. Practically, it took me 8 years to complete it. Because since the 1990s, I've been working in Crimea, and I published several articles on several subjects, some related to archaeology, some related to vegetation, some related to landscape change. And I never really saw something that will bring together all the things that I did that, are quite varied. So at some point I decided, well, I should collect, this information that is published, some of that wasn't published, at that time, and put it together into a book. But essentially, the idea of writing the book came out of a frustration that I had here, and that is explaining to people where I was working. We need to place ourselves before these changes, right after, the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s, and look at, what people really understood back then, Ukraine, Crimea, Russia, the former Russian republics. But even into this century, I became even more frustrated because when I said, I'm doing research in Crimea, people didn't know what I was talking about, or where was that idea. And if you read the preface in the book, I mentioned, this, that many Americans in particular, I refer this, to Americans, but I realized that, in other parts of the world, particularly in Europe, that might be the case. People didn't know where Crimea was or what country it belonged to. In 2014, this became very obvious, but before then, it wasn't. So I tried to explain in the beginning of the book, we have heard of this place. If we remember historical events like the Yalta Conference, right? Yalta is a city in Crimea. Mark Twain wrote a book about his travels, and he happened to be in Sevastopol, and he talks about it, and yet we know about Sevastopol. We hear about, the war. We hear about, these places. We hear about, the plague coming into Europe in the 1300s, and coming, through the Silk Road and eventually reaching this place that, is in Crimea that at that time, was known by a different name. That frustration also extended to the times when I was trying to apply for grants. I applied for grants at National Geographic Society. I applied for grants at the National Science Foundation, and sometimes it wasn't clear where that was. I am a geographer. My background is in geography, and, I needed to explain a little bit more about that. Another thing that, a third, I would say, reason why I published this book is because I realized that, and something related to what I just explained, is that there is no book about Crimea's nature and environment written in a language other than Russian and Ukrainian. Right? There are many other books. There are books about World War II. Historical books about, the Crimean War. There are books about, the Tatar population. There are books about, other historical topics, but nothing about geography and about environment. So I wanted to do this. In fact, if you look at, the books that have been published, in the 1800s and 1900s, in the 1800s, there were more books published in English about Crimea. And I'm talking about geography of Crimea and, population and everything, together. And the only one in the 1900s, which is not written, even in English, it's actually in German, was actually written in the 1940s by a natural scientist, who actually was sent to Crimea during the occupation, the Nazi occupation of Crimea. I mentioned, a few of these things in in my book. I wanted to talk more about, this particular person, but for political reasons, I didn't. There was one of my colleagues from Crimea who said, well, this is a very sensitive topic of what happened, and all that, and don't go into details. But, I was fascinated, by the idea of, the Nazis, funding, this book. And the book, is cited, obviously, there. The book, is basically, like many things that, about the landscape, about vegetation. You can actually see that, it's more of like a compilation. I mean, you can see things that were published before then by other people working particularly at the botanical gardens. So it's a compilation, but, it's something that, if someone wanted to learn about Crimea, which the Nazis meant to do that, it was there. And since then, nothing has been written. But I would actually say that there was something that was written in the 1990s. There was an event that was sponsored by several institutions, including the World Wildlife Fund, and it was a meeting or a workshop on biodiversity, and out of that came out, something. It's not really quite like what I wrote. It's more about the topic of biodiversity, and it has very good maps. That book actually, which came out, in the late 1990s, and it's a really nice book. It's written in Russian, English, Ukraine, with summaries in Ukrainian and Crimean Tatar. That book actually, told me one thing, is that, Crimeans are actually interested in showing, their natural and cultural riches, to the world. But, many of them, probably, can't really, write something, at the level, of, being published, outside. I think the language problem, might be one reason. So there are lots of really good books in Russian and Ukrainian. I collected them basically, and I use them, I actually know many of the authors. Some have sadly, passed away because, some had been working, for very long. So the combination of these factors, pushed me, to really write this book. So I started working on it sometime in 2007. So I went on sabbatical for the first time, at that time, and I started working on it. So that's pretty much, how this all started. Well, it is very interesting, the resources that existed, for this book were incredible. There was a lot of information, particularly during the Soviet period. There was quite a lot of research in geology and in terms of vegetation, soils, many resources. The problem is that, many of these publications were not available in the West. Not only they were written in Russian or in Ukrainian, but you couldn't get them here. Now it's much more. They're more available because you can actually search Yandex or even Google, and you will find sometimes PDFs of these publications. I don't know why, but not back. This is just a recent thing that has been made available. But there was quite a lot of information. The problem is actually to integrate, all that information, because the Russian school, particularly, in terms of, geography, geology, and the areas that I'm actually working, is very compartmentalized. It's not like sometimes, here in North America, we tend to learn our own specialty and then learn other things, and without being specialists. At least, be able to discuss other things. There, the problem is that, when I would read something, it's going to be very specialized. Or if I go and, talk to the author will say, okay, I did this. And if I ask a question beyond what I did, he or she will say, go and talk to this other person, who is the specialist. So it's kind of, very difficult, to really find a holistic view, which is kind of, like what I was, or the kind of, geography that I do. I sometimes, had to jump, from place to place and, try to reconcile sometimes, these different views about the problem. It's just two different specialists looking at it. So that was actually the most difficult part, but there was quite a lot of information, and there is still out there a lot of information that I couldn't get. Some in archives, some in the form of theses and dissertations, reports. Not very easy sometimes to get it, particularly back in the 1990s or, at the beginning, of the last decade. Getting to certain archives or things for a foreigner, wasn't, particularly in Crimea. I'm talking about, an area that saw very little foreign. I mean, the amount of foreigners that they saw, in the past, was actually very small. So it was a challenge, I would say, to get all this information. Despite being a small territory, as I said in the book about the size of the state of Massachusetts, the peninsula is very diverse. Right? First of all, we have an area of mountains in the south. We have mountains, that are relatively tall. We're talking about here places, where we can reach elevations of 1,300 meters above the sea level. With very varied geology, lots of features, geological features as well, like faults, and a diversity, of smaller and very well localized features like caves. And then to the north, you have, this flat area, like a very, very flat area that looks pretty much like what southern Ukraine and southern Russia looks like, an area of steppe, no vegetation, no trees. I mean, the vegetation is practically steppe. There's this strong contrast. Historically, though, there has been, these two areas have created a divide between, let's say, people who settle in the south, which is an area, that has a relatively, more rainfall, more resources, lots of trees, lots of, water resources, and the north that has been mainly occupied by nomadic people. And I'm talking about here nomadic people, from ancient times, like the Scythians, and then more recently the Nogai Tatars. But that actually changed completely, in the 20th century, because that area is being seen as an area that is idle, and there were several attempts to develop the area, but they all failed, because the problem with that area in the north is that there's not enough rainfall to really sustain agriculture. So there were several attempts to really develop the area, even during the Stalin era. There were several attempts that, failed, but, the attempts, went back to even, the times of the Tsars. But it's not until the late 50s and early 60s that Khrushchev's Virgin Lands campaign, the canal, the North Canal that connected the Dnieper Valley, the Dnieper, was built into Crimea, and actually made that area change completely. This also, changed many things in the area, not only in the amount of population, but also in terms of ethnicity. Now you get, already, an area that, is actually, there is very little population there, but it's predominantly Tatar, particularly Nogai Tatar. And then you get, these mixtures of people, that is something that already started, earlier, of course. I mean, we need to remember also of the deportation of the Tatar population that also, was meant to be replaced, by ethnic Russians and Ukrainians, by Slavic population. So things have already changed, but that particular area, completely changed. I mean, you look at photographs of the 1940s, for example, during the Nazi invasion, at the time of the war, or even earlier, and this looks, totally different. I mean, what you see is this area covered, with feather grass. It was a huge expanse, practically, virgin lands, although I wouldn't say, that all of it was virgin lands, because I'll get back to that. There is something interesting, aspect, that is mentioned in the book. But that all changed. Now what you see is a landscape that looks pretty much like the Corn Belt in the United States, like Iowa, where every single piece of land is farmed. Right? So I'm actually wondering now, how is that going to change? Because with the canal already cut off from the Dnieper River, after 2014, there have been, some other options that, Crimea has been looking into. First, they tried to divert some of the rivers into the canal, particularly the dams, but they have actually been going through a lot of several droughts, and that is actually not working. They are also planning on extracting water from the underground. But I don't know. I tried to follow a little bit, that, and apparently, I don't get much information. Sometimes I read, the Crimean newspapers that talk about, that. But I'm just wondering, what's going to happen in this area. Some of my colleagues, have actually mentioned the idea of, a lot of that is going to revert to the original ecosystem, which is the same thing that, people say here in the Great Plains when we talk about, the water of the Ogallala aquifer, completely, being depleted, and, what's going to happen in this area. I mean, that is now a wheat belt here in the United States. Is that going to go back, to prairie, and then we're going to have bison again? We don't know. So I'm actually wondering what's going to happen there. It definitely is going to be another change pretty soon there. But basically answering, the question of, diversity of lands, of environments, I will start, from that divide that has actually made, Crimea, practically, two environments. The endowed, south, the mountains, with its Mediterranean climate in the south, or sub-Mediterranean climate, and then the dry steppe in the north, with relatively, poor possibilities, for the development until, water was available. The thing that they're actually changing now is the crops that they are planting. So the last thing that I read was that in the past, they had crops like rice, for example, and there that now they are no longer able to plant. So they are actually moving, to planting, things. But having said that, a lot of the products, that they are, available in that area, it's quite a huge variety of things. Fruit crops, we have also grapes, right? And grapes, are actually irrigated, in that area, particularly the farther north you are. They have also all kind of cereals in that area. So now, they are trying to change to less water demanding crops, and so rice is actually out of the question, now. But as far as being self-sufficient in food, I don't think that is, or self-sufficient in water. That's the problem. The canal also supplies water to some of the cities. I'm talking about not irrigation water, but also water, for, drinking water and water for other purposes. So I don't know. I don't think, Crimea was self-sufficient, in food before, and I don't think it will be. I'm talking about in recent times. Maybe when economies, were like at the time of the Greek, colonies, in which, still imported things, because, they would export, the Greek colonists in the last part of the last millennium BC, they were actually importing a lot of things. Archaeologists have found, which archaeologists that I work with, they were finding, things that, would not have been farmed or obtained in Crimea. So trade has always been important for Crimea. Having, this varied geology, you would think that, they will have everything, but, Crimea is limited, in terms of the most important resources. I mean, there is evidently natural gas and oil, but not in amounts that are enough to really create an economy depending on these resources. There are other things are considered mineral or geological resources, but they are not really important in terms of the world economy, like lime, for example. Crimea has always exported lime and materials for construction, and in the north, particularly around the Sivage, which is these hypersaline lakes and lagoons in that area. There has always been, this extraction of soda, salt, and a series of minerals that are mentioned in the book as well, which actually continues to this day. I mean, there's quite a lot of pollution in that area that is related to this. So those minerals are actually perhaps one of the or the group of minerals that are more commercial, I would say. Oil and gas probably needs a little bit more of work in terms of finding reserves that are profitable, right? Is that going to happen at some point? I don't know. But definitely, the geology, it's actually, or at least, there are already studies that, show that. But whether they are, as I say, profitable, I don't know. The way I have approached the Black Sea in the book is more from its evolution, and its geological evolution and its importance for Crimea in terms of navigation. I have not really mentioned much about the resources, because if I do that, I will have to end up writing about other things. I will have to write about Romania and the oil fields there. I would have to talk about other parts that would actually dilute the idea of Crimea. I talk about the sea level changes. I talk about navigation. I talk about pollution, like recent pollution, particularly, by the main rivers. I mean, we have, an interesting set of rivers, coming, from Eastern Europe and from Russia, Ukraine, bringing, all kind of things. I talk about the Sea of Azov there, but also, mainly in characteristics, not much on modern resources. I mentioned, a few things also, how the Black Sea influences climate, which is, very interesting. The reason why we have these special climates in southern Crimea that people equate with the Mediterranean, which I explain is not exactly the same, is something that, is a series of combination of atmospheric developments and the temperatures of the Black Sea, particularly because the circulation of the Black Sea brings in warmer waters from the south. I do mention also, in terms of resources, some important species, and the ones that are I'm talking about here, marine wildlife, fish in particular, that have been overfished. I mentioned also the case of how some have been affected by pollution, particularly by creating explosions of certain algae or explosion of certain marginal populations that will outcompete with the important populations. So it was more at that level that it's more about the level of not only human relations with the rest of the Black Sea, climate, and also species, particularly fish. So it's certainly limited to that aspect. I mentioned about, in the book, about certain species that only exist there. I mean, endemic species, some relict species that there is a particular species of pine, for example, there is a relict from a pine that, was spread, in the Mediterranean, in the past. The endemics that are species that only exist there, although one of my colleagues, has done, a botanist, actually, I've been in contact with him, and he has done, a study of those, and he said that, some have been misinterpreted. So there aren't really endemics, but there are still, a lot of endemics, and there is a map that I included there, with endemics of plants and animals. There are certain species that have disappeared in other areas in the Mediterranean, but they still exist there. There is this legless lizard. That one time, I had an encounter with one of them, being in the field. It looks pretty much like a snake. So when you see it, it looks like a snake, and when this animal, sees, a person, it's totally harmless. It kind of, coils itself, and jumps. So the thing, jumped, over me. And also imagine, this snake, coming, flying, over you, was actually really scared. Well, this species, exists, are supposed to be, have existed, all through the Black Sea and the Mediterranean. But Crimea is one of the last places, where it has been, and it's obviously, protected. The problem, as I explained in the book, is that people, take it, sometimes, as a snake, and it's not a snake. It's a legless. It's a lizard that developed, as such. You have also, among other things that are special to Crimea, its climate. Now, it's relatively warm climate, as I explained in the book, which is not quite Mediterranean, but it's very similar to the Mediterranean. It's created by a series of local phenomena, the interaction with the atmosphere and the sea. And this has always been seen, in the former Russian Empire, in the Soviet Union, in Ukraine, in as an area that, that is special. So many actually wrote a lot about this, and many actually found, since at the time of the SARS, that this particular climate, will cure a lot of, things, including tuberculosis. With that, it came, all the things about the sanatoria and all the special things about the muds and the medicinal muds, some of the lakes on the western part of the peninsula. I mean, in particular Lake Saki, which is, like a lagoon, also, people, go there, to use this mud. So there was a lot of, of that written during the time of the SARS and during the Soviet period about, the special things that Crimea had. Now, they are not special in the sense that they don't exist elsewhere. They are special in the sense that at that time, it was the only place in the country where you will find that, right? I'm talking about, the Russian Empire or the Soviet Union, or even, Ukraine, this is a unique thing. But, of course, you find other things that, you will go to Turkey and, they will be there, or in the Mediterranean or other areas, right? So there is nothing, really unique, but it is unique depending on how you see it or where you come from, right? So it's, imagine that you in Canada have, a place that has a climate, like San Diego, it's going to be kind of, weird. But imagine that you have that. It doesn't mean, it's unique. It's unique in Canada, but it's not unique in the world. So I think, that's what made Crimea so special, particularly, for Russians and Ukrainians, but I would say, not for maybe Turks or Greeks or people from other areas. I did actually make some discoveries, although I wouldn't say, probably I was the first one who did. I mean, I just probably wrote about them. When I arrived, the first time that I arrived, I was working with a team of archaeologists, and I was part of the team and supposed, to work on the environment. So I said, well, I'm going to do, study of soils, and I'm going to do a study of pollen, to reconstruct what the vegetation was when the Greeks arrived. That's what they wanted to see. I mean, what was there, when the Greeks arrived in this part, which is now, the Heraclean place, that area, Sevastopol. So that's one of the colonies there. When I started, talking to people in Kiev or people, Russians, who were actually doing or had done research there, and the local, my local colleagues in Simferopol or some of the other institutes or universities, they said, well, there is no pollen here in Crimea preserved very well because this professor, or this person, who was famous, said that, pollen doesn't preserve there. Now, I did my study, I did the coring, I looked at the pollen, and I was able to reconstruct, the history of vegetation. Along with that, discovered another thing. Where I didn't discover, I just, rectify some things. There are several popular books, and including, some books that are, some publications that I wouldn't actually say they are popular, that we're talking about, certain vegetation types that were actually brought in by the Greek colonists. Came from the Mediterranean, and with them, they brought in crops and certain things. The case of the pistachio tree, which it's mainly, a subtropical species, and Crimea is the northernmost part of the world where you find them in a natural fashion, in natural environment. Many of these publications, mention that have pistachio in Crimea because it was brought in by the Greeks, right? So obviously, they came from the Mediterranean and they brought it. First of all, the species that you find there, is not the same edible species that we have, which is actually originally from Iran. Pistachia vera is the pistachio that is edible. So if they brought that, I don't know. I mean, they probably did, but you don't find evidence, that today. But when I did, my study of pollen, that I was not supposed to find pollen, I saw that the pistachio pollen appear, as early as 7,000, years ago, which is, practically almost a little bit over 4,000 years before the Greeks arrived, which is indicating that the tree already existed. I found other references, of botanists, who also, came up with the idea. No, there was pistachio already there, So many who look at, my data said, okay, well, then these scientists were wrong. These ones were right. But see, this is how you explain, things, is by looking at things. And if someone tells you, no, don't do that because there's no pollen, you're not going to find it. So I consider, that, maybe, I wouldn't say, a discovery, but a contribution. Another one was, which is mentioned in the book, but it's actually mentioned in a paper that I wrote, before then, is how I was looking at the currents, and there is a map, showing, the two systems that, the currents. And the ancient geographers, Greek geographer Strabo actually wrote about it, right? And he actually mentioned the itinerary, to get, let's say, from the Mediterranean, or let's say from the Bosporus, all the way to Crimea and back. And, trade actually, will be, or this current will be very important, for trade in ancient times. So I had in my mind the idea of this. And then one of my colleagues, a geomorphologist, the late Alexander Klukin, and he appears in one of the pictures there in the book, he told me that sometimes he would find, or people would find pieces of tree, like tree stumps with rocks in, incrustations of rocks in the roots. With rocks that, don't exist in Crimea, right? So he was telling me that, most likely, is the drift, of the sea and the currents that actually bring them from other parts, from the Caucasus or from other places. The interesting thing that, that stuck in my mind, and we did actually find one time, on the beach, one tree with that, and he actually pointed that to me. And I came back, to the same place one day after storm, and I found, this tremendous amount of trash. And I was actually, like looking, this is an area that, it was a little bit, close to the public, for a while, and it was still close to the public for several reasons. But they opened, like recently when I was there, sometime, might have been, like 201, something like that, 2001 or something like that. And they, this place, I thought, well, if the people don't come here, why is there so much trash? But I started looking at the trash, and the trash looked like bleached, old. And I started looking at, what the, there were plastic things and things that, like floatable, and I was actually looking at the labels, and they were like made in Turkey, made in many places, So I started, like counting them and making, percentages, from what country, which ones are local. And I published, this is one of the papers, this is not, it's mentioned in the book, but, it's actually in a paper that I published in a book about the Black Sea. Many people, some of my colleagues there and some of my colleagues here didn't like this. It's like, it doesn't explain things, Well, what I was trying to explain with this is not just the trash. What I was actually to explain this is that naturally vegetation from the Mediterranean can make it to Crimea. You can find, seeds or things that, can be carried from the south, dumped, on the beach, removed, by wind, and then they just, you get, new, arrivals, there. So you don't have to have humans bringing, this, from these other areas. Right. So that was another, I wouldn't say discovery, but, it was just, like, an observation that I made to prove my point. Now, some of my colleagues in Crimea liked that in the sense that, there was botanists, who had, this idea of, arrival of vegetation after the ice age, that the sea level of the Black Sea rose, and these currents started like developing again, right? You would have these pieces of material from other areas and getting to Crimea, but because it was getting warmer, they will actually find a spot particularly in this southern part of Crimea. This is the area where I was actually looking at this type of vegetation. Was actually in the south, one of the warmest parts. That area, is where this happened. So it's I wouldn't call it a discovery, but at least it's something that it's a contribution to understanding a little bit more about the natural systems of the peninsula. Speaking, from the geoarchaeology point of view, there has always been human impact in Crimea since, since even before, agriculture, since, humans were actually living in caves. But of course, what I've had in the recent past, and that's mainly, within the past 200 years, is incredible, right? The Soviet period in particular, meant, a lot of changes. Not only, with the building of so many kurorti, that they call it, the resorts, right? Many of these areas, with vegetation that, was rare species, endemic species, was actually, raised, and they built, the sanatoria or these complexes, for the thousands, if not millions of people that every year, arrive in Crimea. This is still happening, today, that this little destruction there. So that is, very detrimental, to the nature there. And of course, there are the reserves, and, there are these areas where building is not allowed. There are some areas that are supposed to be protected, and still you see, these things. But I think that, the period, of the major transformation, I would say the last 100 years, has actually changed completely the face of the peninsula, particularly in the north. As you remember, that area was just like plain steppe, without any agricultural development. That changed completely. But every part of the peninsula has changed in that respect. In the south, as I said, is mainly because of tourism. Right? And yes, tourism, has declined after that, after the collapse of the Soviet Union declined. When I started going there, the tourism was at its lowest. Then it rose up again. Then with the issues, in 2014, kind of went down, and it's actually, picking up again. So that's one thing. Another one is on the sea itself. The pollution, in many of the harbors, particularly in Sevastopol harbor, is actually tremendous. I look at some of the reports, which I mentioned in the book, but there are some reports about the pollutants, and I realized, after I took a swim in, I was actually living for a while when I was there at the Chersonesos Museum, which is right by the sea, and people actually go there to look at the ruins. But then they use also this little beach that is right next to the archaeological site. And I was living in a dacha there. They assigned me to live in one of the dachas there, or in some places, but somewhere in that area. So we just go and swim there. It's like well, I would never go to again there. Overall, the Black Sea is polluted, but there are areas that where it's worse. Particularly around the ports, as I said, Sevastopol Bay, Sevastopol Harbor is one of the, particularly because it's also closed. It has, it's not a really open harbor. It's kind of, like closed, but you have, a lot of that. Not to mention the rivers too. The Sivage is also terribly polluted, particularly the so-called Western Sivage, which is one of the lagoons. Even if you look at a satellite image, you'll see that it looks a different color. I don't know how much people realize this, particularly people who like to swim. I've seen people swimming in places that I wouldn't even swim there, even if for no reason. But I guess many people don't know where they're swimming. But yeah, it has serious problems in some areas. I don't know how much this is known by the public, but certainly some people in the universities have been doing research this. Well, I'll answer first the geological part. The northern part of the peninsula is a little bit more stable than the south. There is the north is actually between two plates. The Eurasian plate, which is more stable, and the plate is actually where the mountains are. That one is a little bit more unstable, and it's an area that actually has earthquakes time to time. The last earthquake, like destructive earthquake, was the Yalta earthquake of 1927. I believe it's which actually destroyed not only Yalta but in other places, right? And there are also earthquakes mentioned, in historical times before then. So it's an area that is active, but it's practically only the south, the mountain. There are faults there. And it's a totally different terrain from the one in the north. In the north, you don't have that. You have still tectonic movements, particularly the sinking, but it's not something that it's like other parts of the world, like in the Caucasus or places like Italy, that you have more frequent earthquakes. Now, in terms of other hazards, the storms, that's an interesting topic, because there are quite a lot of storms. Practically the storms that form in the Black Sea move from west to east, because they are actually they are the same system that develops also along the Mediterranean. But they can be they have been historically some really bad storms. There was one that actually, caused, some, to sink, during the Crimean War. There have been several that actually, have destroyed, facilities, so places like Yalta or places like Sevastopol even have had problems, with that. Recently, a few years ago, there was one that actually even damaged the jetties and, some structures, in Sevastopol. These are storms that, come from the west, and once, they get, over the Black Sea, which is, a relatively warm waters, they actually powered, like really bad winds, and not probably, like a tropical hurricane, but, with a lot of damage, particularly, the waves that they cause. I remember also, when I was working there in the late 90s, ship that actually sank, with passengers traveling, from from Sevastopol to Istanbul. They usually happen more like in the fall and in the winter. But I've never been in one. But there are records of really bad ones. The book is kind of really difficult to place it in a topic. Or in a theme or in a theme. There are several themes that are actually included here. Some are more archaeological, some are more environmental, some are geographic, and some are geological. I didn't mean to write something that will have everything, but at least, some of the topics that probably most people outside Crimea and maybe outside Ukraine and Russia, would like to know about Crimea, particularly in terms of nature, people, environment, right? So it's very difficult, to really place it, within an area. Obviously, the collection is environmental history. That's the collection where it was published, in Ivy Torres. But one thing is that the book is actually written more for non-Crimeans or for non-Ukrainians and non-Russians, because it's the targeted readership or audience is mainly, those who don't know about Crimea. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm really happy, to present, this book. I hope, people can use it, as a reference. Unfortunately, my idea was, also, to tell people there is something very interesting to see in Crimea. Go to Crimea. It's a nice place, to visit. You find wine, really good wine. You find, this, you find archaeology, you find that. Unfortunately, things, turn out to be, like difficult for many people, to travel, right?